The global balance of power has not just tilted. It has completely shattered. We are watching the real-time collapse of the United States' influence on the world stage. Right this very moment, furious world leaders are not just stepping away from the administration. They are actively locking the doors behind them and preparing for the worst. A former general who led the French Foreign Legion recently issued a chilling statement to the international community. He compared joining the escalating war in Iran to buying a discounted ticket on the Titanic long after it had already hit the iceberg. That is the exact sentiment echoing through the halls of power across the entire European continent. The rejection is absolute and unprecedented. France has officially backed out and demanded their name be removed from any military coalition. Spain has publicly declared the military actions illegal and warned of unfolding war crimes. Italy has firmly refused to send a single naval ship to the Strait of Hormuz without a United Nations mandate and a permanent truce. The fallout goes far beyond diplomatic disagreements. The situation has become so deeply fractured that Denmark literally prepared its military troops with explosives and packed emergency blood supplies for a potential war against the United States over territories in Greenland. That was not a drill or a theoretical exercise. That was a historic and terrifying rupture between long-standing allies. The very nations that stood shoulder to shoulder with the American military for decades are now looking at the current administration and seeing a dangerous and unpredictable threat rather than a trusted partner. The damage being done to the global standing of the nation is catastrophic. The entire global south and the top European allies are actively calculating that it is genuinely safer to depend on China and form new alliances in the east than to trust the current leadership in Washington. Welcome to United States News Daily. I am here to break down the complex and rapidly moving pieces of this geopolitical earthquake. If you find this deep dive into our global reality valuable, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a crucial update as this unprecedented story continues to unfold. The frigid ice sheets of Greenland recently became the staging ground for a nightmare scenario that military strategists never thought possible. Danish armed forces were actively mobilized and deployed with explicit orders to prepare for a hostile invasion by the United States. Soldiers were dispatched carrying heavy explosives specifically designated to obliterate landing strips and airport runways to prevent American military aircraft from touching down. Medical logistics teams simultaneously rushed massive emergency blood supplies to the remote Northern Territory, calculating the devastating human casualties of an impending armed conflict between founding members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The government in Copenhagen did not view the escalating rhetoric from Washington as a mere political stunt or an empty threat. They interpreted it as a credible and imminent declaration of territorial conquest. Commanders readied their troops for a full-scale war to defend their sovereignty against the very superpower that was supposed to guarantee European security. This catastrophic breakdown in trust illustrates a terrifying new reality where democratic nations must suddenly militarize against the commander-in-chief of the free world. The psychological shockwave of this mobilization reverberated through every defense ministry across the continent. When a steadfast ally feels compelled to rig its own infrastructure with detonators to repel American forces, the foundational pillars of international stability have completely crumbled. The sheer audacity of the territorial claims forced a peaceful European nation into a defensive posture not seen since the Second World War, completely shattering the illusion of Western unity. While conventional military preparations plunge former allies into paranoia, the existential dread has reached the highest levels of global health and humanitarian institutions. The World Health Organization has begun quietly but frantically drafting contingency protocols for the unthinkable consequence of this spiraling geopolitical madness. Medical experts and emergency response coordinators are currently evaluating supply chains and establishing crisis frameworks designed to manage the apocalyptic aftermath of nuclear annihilation. Bureaucrats sitting in pristine offices are analyzing the logistics of treating millions of civilians exposed to catastrophic radiation levels resulting from a potential nuclear exchange in the Middle East. The sheer gravity of these preparations cannot be overstated. Health officials are forced to allocate precious resources and manpower away from standard global health initiatives to focus on surviving a man-made doomsday triggered by erratic and aggressive foreign policy decisions. These agencies are operating under the grim assumption that the situation in Iran could escalate beyond conventional warfare in a matter of hours. The deployment of nuclear assets is no longer a relic of the Cold War era. It is a present and pulsating threat driving the daily agendas of international aid organizations. Global watchdogs are actively preparing triage centers and radiation protocols because they fundamentally lack faith in the restraint of the current American leadership. This environment of absolute dread has triggered a massive and uncoordinated but unified rebellion among the most powerful nations in Europe. The diplomatic silence has been shattered by vocal and searing condemnations from the highest officers of state. The President of France drew a definitive line in the sand, categorically refusing any French participation in the military build-up. He issued a stark and uncompromising directive ensuring that French naval assets will absolutely not join any forced operation to dominate the Strait of Hormuz. France has effectively stripped its name from the coalition roster, signaling to the globe that they want absolutely nothing to do with the escalating chaos. The French government is washing its hands of the entire military endeavor, recognizing the toxic volatility radiating from Washington. They are actively shielding their military personnel from being dragged into a conflict lacking any coherent strategic vision or ethical foundation. Simultaneously, the Prime Minister of Spain delivered a crushing blow to the remaining shreds of American diplomatic credibility. Speaking with unwavering moral clarity, Pedro Sanchez branded the military operations surrounding Iran as fundamentally illegal. He systematically dismantled the justification for the conflict, highlighting the devastating collateral damage, the looming humanitarian crisis, and the blatant violations of international law. Spain is aggressively distancing itself, refusing to be complicit in actions they classify as potential war crimes. The Spanish leadership emphasized the severe economic consequences that this unwarranted aggression is inflicting upon the global south and innocent civilian populations. This is not a polite disagreement over policy nuances. This is a profound moral and legal denunciation of American military aggression from a pivotal European partner. The dominoes continue to fall as the Italian Defense Ministry joins the chorus of defiance. Italy has completely debunked misleading narratives pushed by the American administration that falsely suggested European compliance and participation. The Italian government released statements to correct the record, making it crystal clear that they will not authorize any war missions and will deny entry into the contested waters without a formalized truce and a legitimate multilateral framework governed by the United Nations. They explicitly demanded that international law and diplomatic consensus must precede any naval deployment. The message echoing from Paris, Madrid, and Rome is identical and deafening. The European powers are abandoning the American military apparatus, leaving the administration completely isolated on the world stage, desperately attempting to fight a disastrous war without the backing of the free world. The unified front has dissolved into a spectacular display of international rejection, proving that the traditional alliance network has been irreparably fractured by reckless leadership. The psychological fracture between Washington and its historical partners has crystallized into hard, undeniable data. Global public opinion is no longer merely drifting away. It has experienced a violent, tectonic shift. Recent comprehensive polling conducted by prominent research organizations reveals a staggering reality that foreign policy experts are struggling to comprehend. Citizens residing in every single one of the top allied nations of the United States now firmly believe it is vastly superior to forge strategic alliances and deep economic dependencies with China rather than relying on American leadership. This is a monumental revelation. The global balance of power is not currently tilting toward Beijing. That transition is already complete. The perception of American reliability has plummeted so drastically that the drop is essentially 100% across key demographics in allied territories. Decades of carefully cultivated soft power and diplomatic goodwill have evaporated. Nations that once viewed the Western superpower as a symbol of security and democratic stability now perceive it as a harbinger of unpredictable chaos. They are actively recalibrating their national security strategies, turning their gaze eastward to secure their futures in a multipolar world where Washington is no longer viewed as a rational actor. This catastrophic erosion of trust was entirely foreseeable, yet the sheer speed of the collapse has left international observers breathless. The damage inflicted upon the global standing of the nation is profound and systemic. While diplomatic relationships can sometimes be repaired over generations, the current rupture requires far more than polite handshakes and revised treaties. The international community is actively watching a superpower consume itself from the inside out, projecting instability outward into every volatile region on the planet. World leaders are not just reacting to erratic foreign policy decisions, they are fundamentally questioning the underlying machinery of the American state. The perception is no longer just that a specific administration is acting recklessly, but that the entire framework of governance is fundamentally defective. The guardrails that once assured allies of institutional stability have ostensibly been obliterated, leaving a vacuum of leadership that rival powers are more than eager to fill. The root of this international panic stems from a deep, critical analysis of the American legal and constitutional apparatus. Across capitals in Europe, Asia, and the global South, the prevailing consensus is that the democratic system has critically failed to contain authoritarian impulses. Foreign ministries are watching in utter disbelief as the highest court in the land grants unprecedented, absolute immunity to the commander-in-chief, effectively elevating the executive branch above the rule of law. When a leader is legally shielded from the consequences of launching unlawful military campaigns, deploying forces without congressional approval, or instigating global economic warfare, allies realize they are dealing with an unchecked sovereign rather than a democratic partner. This realization has shattered the illusion of a checks and balances system. The international community views the judicial allowance for such predatory executive behavior as a fatal flaw in the constitutional architecture. They recognize that treaties and defense pacts are essentially worthless if the individual holding the nuclear codes operates with complete legal impunity and an aggressive disregard for international norms. Beyond the corridors of traditional Western power, the reverberations of this systemic decline are entirely reshaping the developing world. Nations comprising the global South, which have historically navigated the turbulent waters of superpower rivalries by maintaining delicate neutrality, are now making definitive choices. They observe the unchecked unilateral aggression radiating from the West and calculate the severe economic and societal risks of remaining tethered to a volatile financial system and an unpredictable military hegemon. Consequently, these developing economies are rapidly accelerating their integration into alternative financial systems and infrastructure initiatives championed by Eastern rivals. They are securing long-term energy contracts, accepting massive foreign direct investments, and aligning their technological infrastructure with new standards. This is a pure survival mechanism. They cannot risk having their essential supply chain severed or their foreign reserves weaponized by the sudden, impulsive whim of a legally untouchable executive. Because of this cascading failure, foreign diplomats and strategic analysts are openly stating that cosmetic political changes will no longer suffice to restore global confidence. The damage is so severe that it demands massive, sweeping constitutional reforms to definitively limit the war-making powers and unilateral authority of any sitting president. The rest of the world understands that the foundational documents written centuries ago are currently incapable of restraining bad faith actors operating in the modern era. Until the nation proves it can legally bind its own leadership and prevent rogue behavior on the international stage, the pivot away from Western hegemony will only accelerate. Allies cannot and will not tie their sovereign survival to a domestic legal framework that enables reckless aggression without consequence. The desert heat of the Qatari capital recently witnessed a diplomatic exchange that stripped away all the polite fictions of international relations. The Prime Minister of Qatar stood beside visiting dignitaries from the Turkish government and delivered a blistering assessment of the spreading regional inferno. His words were carefully chosen but cut through the diplomatic fog like a sharpened blade. He publicly declared that every seasoned observer watching the region burn knows exactly who the primary beneficiary of this widening conflict truly is. He accused unseen forces of deliberately dragging the entire Middle Eastern region into a catastrophic vortex to serve hidden, entirely self-serving agendas. While he deliberately left the specific names unspoken, the implications echoed violently across the globe. Strategic analysts immediately pointed their fingers toward the halls of power in Moscow and the heavily fortified war rooms in Tel Aviv. The calculated ambiguity of his statement only amplified its devastating impact, suggesting a deliberate and cynical orchestration of chaos designed specifically to distract the Western world from other, equally critical geopolitical battlegrounds. Simultaneously, a bizarre and highly contradictory policy shift began emanating from Washington, leaving seasoned foreign policy experts completely bewildered. The very administration aggressively beating the drums of war against Iran quietly initiated the dismantling of crippling financial barricades that had been in place for years. Special envoys formally announced the abrupt lifting of heavy banking sanctions against major financial institutions based in Belarus. These banks operate as direct, undeniable financial conduits for the Russian government, laundering assets and facilitating illicit trade. By unshackling these institutions, an enormous, unexpected financial gift was handed directly to the Kremlin at the exact moment they needed it most. The absurdity deepened exponentially as credible reports surfaced indicating a serious push by the current administration to permanently erase oil embargoes not just against the Russian Federation, but potentially removing all restrictions on Iranian petroleum exports as well. The internal logic presented an inescapable, deadly paradox. The current regime is actively considering allowing the Iranian government to generate massive streams of unchecked revenue through unrestricted global oil sales. Those very funds are simultaneously flowing through newly unblocked Russian financial networks, directly fueling military operations that ultimately target and kill American service members and their regional allies in various proxy conflicts. It is a cyclical machinery of self-inflicted destruction. The administration is essentially unfreezing the bank accounts of the very adversaries they claim to be confronting, allowing a massive torrent of petrodollars to completely revitalize the brutal war machines of both Moscow and Tehran. While active adversaries receive unexpected financial lifelines and diplomatic cover, the sharpest political daggers are being exclusively reserved for a besieged and desperate ally. High-ranking defense nominees and prominent political figures within the current administration have launched a relentless, highly coordinated rhetorical assault on the leadership in Kiev. The Ukrainian president is routinely mocked on national television and dismissed as a mere entertainer, stripped of his dignity by the very nation that previously promised unwavering, endless support. Defense officials openly complain about the rapid depletion of American military stockpiles, aggressively framing the defense of Eastern Europe as a wasteful and unnecessary diversion of vital resources. They argue vehemently that advanced artillery shells, crucial satellite intelligence, and sophisticated defensive interceptors should be hoarded domestically or redirected entirely to fuel the expanding conflict in the Middle East. This coordinated domestic messaging campaign actively serves the grand strategic goals of the Russian military, purposefully eroding the fragile political will required to sustain the defense of Ukrainian sovereignty. The victim of a brutal, unprovoked invasion is now being openly treated as a burdensome liability, while the aggressors watch from afar, immensely satisfied by the rapid fracturing of Western resolve. Amidst this profound betrayal, the President of Ukraine stood before the European Council, delivering an impassioned speech heavy with the immense weight of an abandoned nation. He did not mince words about the shifting, dangerous tides of the overarching conflict. He painted a grim, terrifying picture of the exact mindset the Russian negotiators will inevitably bring to any future settlement tables. The Ukrainian leader warned that the aggressors feel dangerously emboldened by the sudden explosion of violence in the Persian Gulf. Military commanders in Moscow are actively watching the rapid consumption of advanced air defense missiles across the Middle Eastern theater and calculating a looming, fatal shortage for the Ukrainian armed forces. The global distraction is absolute and complete, and the Kremlin knows exactly how to exploit it. Furthermore, the Ukrainian president highlighted the devastating, ongoing paralysis of the European Union. The 20th comprehensive sanctions package against the Russian economy has completely stalled, hopelessly trapped in endless bureaucratic gridlock. Critical financial security guarantees, explicitly meant to sustain the Ukrainian state through the coming brutal winters, remain entirely frozen and agonizingly out of reach. He laid out a terrifying reality where the deliberate lifting of American sanctions is flooding the Russian war budget with fresh capital, while Kiev is systematically starved of the exact resources necessary to protect innocent civilian lives from nightly bombardments. The Ukrainian leadership clearly recognizes the deadly trap currently being set by the international community. They have consistently signaled a strong willingness to negotiate a genuine, lasting ceasefire, but the essential communication channels from Washington have gone completely dark since the ballistic missiles started flying in the Middle East. The overarching fear right now is that Moscow, feeling stronger and significantly wealthier than at any point since the initial invasion began, will approach eventual peace talks not as an opportunity for compromise, but as a rigid demand for absolute capitulation. They recognize that their strategic allies in Tehran are successfully drawing the complete attention and resources of the Western military apparatus far away from the Eastern Front. In direct response to this abandonment, Kiev is desperately trying to remind the European continent that their ongoing fight is fundamentally a European struggle for survival. The president emphasized that securing a definitive, unbreakable timeline for full integration into the European Union is the only remaining diplomatic shield against total subjugation. He argued passionately that formalizing their rightful place within the European family is no longer just a lofty political aspiration. It is an absolute, non-negotiable necessity for sheer survival. The longer the free world remains entirely fixated on the manufactured, spiraling chaos in the desert sands, the closer the Eastern Front inches toward total, irreversible collapse. The proverbial wolves are no longer just scratching at the door. They have been willingly handed the keys to the financial gates by the very guards originally hired to keep them out. Deep beneath the scorching deserts and turbulent oceans lies the actual currency driving this endless cycle of global bloodshed. The geopolitical chess match currently paralyzing the international community is not fundamentally about clashing political ideologies or ancient territorial disputes. It is almost entirely about the desperate, unyielding global thirst for crude petroleum. The narrow, treacherous waters of the Strait of Hormuz represent the most critical geographical bottleneck on the entire planet. Roughly 20% of the total global liquid energy supply must navigate through that single, easily contested maritime corridor every single day. That immense concentration of resource wealth creates an unparalleled strategic vulnerability for every industrialized nation. It effectively transforms a regional waterway into a global hostage situation. The nations possessing these vast subterranean reserves hold the ultimate diplomatic trump card, possessing the terrifying ability to instantly cripple foreign economies simply by threatening to turn off a valve or utilizing unmanned aerial vehicles to harass commercial tanker traffic. This inherent geographical imbalance guarantees perpetual instability, heavily incentivizing aggressive military posturing, proxy conflicts, and constant covert operations. Forward-thinking defense strategists and elite international security experts have clearly identified a definitive exit strategy from this lethal historical loop. A massive, systemic global transition toward renewable energy infrastructure is increasingly viewed not as a mere environmental preference, but as the absolute highest tier of national defense strategy. Harvesting solar radiation, harnessing oceanic wind currents, and tapping into deep geothermal reservoirs offer a revolutionary disruption to the traditional balance of global power. Unlike petroleum deposits, which are violently contested precisely because they are geographically isolated and finite, renewable resources are inherently decentralized and infinitely abundant across the globe. No hostile foreign power can establish a naval blockade against the sun. No rogue state can embargo the wind or manipulate the tides. Transitioning an economy away from fossil fuels physically removes the primary structural catalyst for international warfare. It permanently neutralizes the geopolitical extortion tactics utilized by wealthy authoritarian regimes for generations. When a nation generates its own power locally, it strips its adversaries of their most potent economic weapon. Against this glaringly obvious strategic reality, the domestic policy decisions currently emanating from the administration cross the line from standard political mismanagement into active, deliberate national sabotage. At the exact moment the entire world is receiving a brutal, undeniable, real-time demonstration regarding the fatal dangers of extreme petroleum dependency, the leadership in Washington is aggressively pulling the nation backward into the dark ages of energy production. Senior officials are reportedly advancing an incomprehensible legislative plan to deliberately pay nearly $8 billion to explicitly shut down massive, fully planned offshore wind projects. They are literally utilizing vast sums of taxpayer capital to destroy the very infrastructure capable of providing independent, unblockable power to hundreds of thousands of domestic households. Instead of accelerating the clean energy transition to secure the future sovereignty of the nation, they are forcefully rerouting massive federal investments back into the archaic, blood-soaked fossil fuel industry. They are choosing to subsidize vulnerability. This policy direction is a catastrophic miscalculation that defies basic historical logic and betrays future generations. A cursory review of the last century reveals a grim and undeniable truth that defense contractors rarely discuss publicly. From the devastating mechanized campaigns of the Second World War to the sprawling, chaotic desert conflicts of the late 20th century, the frantic scramble to secure and control oil has consistently served as the primary ignition switch for mass human slaughter. Entire generations of soldiers have been sacrificed on the altar of petroleum access. Conversely, the historical record contains absolutely zero instances of major international wars being waged over access to solar panels or wind turbines. A world systematically decoupled from fossil fuel extraction is a world permanently stripped of its most potent incentive for armed conflict. The current leadership is witnessing the catastrophic failures of the petroleum age playing out violently across the Middle East. Yet they are deliberately choosing to chain the long-term destiny of the nation to that exact sinking ship. They are prioritizing the entrenched financial interests of massive energy conglomerates while actively sacrificing the long-term security, economic independence, and geopolitical stability of the Republic. They are ensuring that future conflicts will be fought over the exact same resources that are burning the world today. The deep geopolitical fractures tearing apart international alliances are simultaneously ripping through the very heart of the domestic political establishment. Inside the heavily guarded committee rooms of the national legislature, severe ideological civil wars are breaking out in plain view of the global public. High-ranking representatives are openly interrogating nominated intelligence officials, exposing a terrifying level of internal distrust regarding the absolute highest levels of national security. During a recent and highly contentious confirmation hearing, prominent lawmakers clashed aggressively over explosive allegations that foreign allies and influential domestic media conglomerates deliberately deployed massive misinformation campaigns. These covert operations were allegedly designed specifically to deceive the executive branch into launching an unprovoked and disastrous military strike against Iranian targets. When the actual architects of national defense are publicly accusing each other of falling for foreign psychological operations, and dragging the Republic into unconstitutional wars based on fabricated intelligence, the foundational stability of the government has entirely collapsed. The political apparatus is no longer functioning as a unified body protecting the national interest. It has devolved into a chaotic arena of warring factions, each deeply suspicious of the motives driving foreign policy. This cascading failure of leadership, both abroad and at home, paints an incredibly grim portrait of the immediate future. The nation stands completely isolated on the world stage, hemorrhaging strategic partners while simultaneously fracturing from within. If the current trajectory remains unaltered, the Republic faces a dark horizon defined by endless proxy conflicts, crippling energy vulnerabilities, and a total loss of moral and diplomatic authority. The systematic dismantling of institutional guardrails ensures that the next international crisis could easily spiral into an irreversible global catastrophe. Navigating these turbulent and unprecedented times requires an informed and heavily engaged citizenry. If you found this comprehensive breakdown valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel to ensure you never miss our in-depth geopolitical coverage. Your voice matters immensely in this critical conversation, so please share your personal perspectives and analysis down in the comments section below. We want to hear exactly how you view these unfolding global events. Furthermore, help us cut through the mainstream media noise by sharing this broadcast across your social media platforms and sending it directly to your family members and friends. The world is changing at a blinding pace, and we must face these complex realities together. Thank you for trusting United States News Daily.